I am Dr. Lipi, and we have IC number 33 on the show, which is dealing with the consequences of cluster endophthalmitis, a pragmatic approach based on experience. So cluster endophthalmitis or CE, I'll be here on referring cluster endophthalmitis as CE. This is an alarming episode for the surgeon, the department, and the hospital or the institute. I welcome my co-instructors who will cover up the varied dimensions of CE. It's already given in the program outlay what the series of the sequence of talk will be. So I won't give time to that. Instead of that, I'll just welcome the first speaker, Dr. Karan AK, who is already on the show. His video is on. So he's from Arvind Eye Hospital. Yeah, good evening. So he's from Arvind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore. He's going to provide guidelines on diagnosis and clinical management of CE. Dr. Karan has done his post-graduation from Bangalore and now being a senior retina consultant at one of the largest volume hospital, Arvind Eye Hospital. He has enough experience, I think, regarding his talk. So Dr. Karan, all yours.
Dr. Lipi, can I just have 30 seconds of your time, please? Yeah, the thing is, the chief guest has asked for the inauguration to be from 5:30. So President Sir has requested if we can wind up all the sessions by 5:25. So truncate a little on the session. So I'm very sorry about this, but I just wanted to share with you, please. I do know it will cut out on your time.
Okay, so if it is,
please.
Yeah. If it is an instruction from Dr. Partha sir, then of course we are not going to overrule that. So I'll request all my co-instructors. To rush through the slides if they can and convey the pertinent points only. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible and is my screen visible?
Yeah, your screen is visible. You're audible. You can start.
Okay, I'll try to wind up soon. Okay, the cluster endophthalmitis, I'll be talking about only the diagnosis and management. So as ma'am said, cluster endophthalmitis can occur post-cataract surgery or post-intravitreal injection. And you can know that you all know endophthalmitis is such a grave complication that you can imagine if a cluster comes, how like alarming it is to the institute. So post-cataract surgery, usually it occurs due to these mass surgeries that occur in the same OT environment, and post-intravitreal injection mostly because of intraocular aliquoting of the Avastin molecule. Though the incidence of ENDOF has been coming down over the years because of improved surgical technique, intracameral moxifloxacin, we still have this bugbear of cluster endophthalmitis that just comes and grips our institution. So let's talk about it. So what is it exactly? So it is the occurrence of endophthalmitis much higher than the local incidence pattern. So what pattern you're having since so many years, if there are more than 2 or more cases of infections at one time or repeated post-op injections under similar circumstances, that is with the same surgeon, same staff, or same operating room. So what are the causative organisms? Usually they are virulent organisms, usually gram-negative. Pseudomonas is being the major cause of these cluster endophthalmitis. Why Pseudomonas? Because they usually can grow even in and stay inert in nutrient deficient irrigating fluids for long durations. Then usually they are hospital acquired stains, so they'll be multi-drug resistant, so more difficult to treat. They release a lot of exotoxins, so that will destroy the eye also. So this is a usual presentation of cluster endophthalmitis. On the right, we have a patient with chemosis, lid edema, ring infiltrate, almost melting, going in for melt. Here we have a ring infiltrate early and hypopyon. And when we do the B scan, we find severe vitritis, choroidal thickening. And here we can see there's a shallow subtenuous fluid forming a T sign. We also have reported one anacanthoma cluster endophthalmitis, where we have early superficial ring infiltrate, scleritis, and these small exudative RD bumps also developing. When we see all the reported cluster end-off in India, most of them are, like I said, Pseudomonas, and some are other gram-negative organisms like Enterobacter, Klebsiella, and Burkholderia. And when you see the etiology, they're mostly phacoprobe, the internal tubings, irrigating fluids, or air conditioning, the lenses, even the local anesthetic drop also can be implicated. Another syndrome which we need to keep in mind is toxic anterior segment syndrome, and they also can come as a cluster to the hospital after surgery. 6-7 patients can come, and then we don't have to be alarmed when we see these. We have to differentiate it from end-off, from infective end-off. This is a non-infective condition, and usually it occurs due to like toxic agents present in either the solution, irrigating fluid, the antibiotic injection, endotoxin, or any residue on the instruments. And when you see the clinically, they usually come within 1 or 2 days of the surgery, whereas end-off, even very severe ones, maybe second or third day. So there's a mild overlap. And when you see, we have a limbus to limbus colon edema and mild hypopion and some FM, which is usually like slightly regressing in this case. But the clincher is when you do the B scan, we find almost echo-free vitreous or mild dot epicytes that are seen in this case. So when we see such a case or cluster of these kind of cases, it's preferable to admit all of them, explain to the patient, take a consent, give hourly, half-hourly steroids, dilating drops, topical antibiotics maybe 6 times, and intramuscular dexamethasone after checking the RBS, and then monitor the IOP. Then we reevaluate the patient in 4 to 6 hours. If they're better, good, we can still admit them for next 1 or 2 days to keep them for observation. If it's worse, we need to treat as infective end-off. Even the best of us also sometimes can have a doubt whether it's infective or non-infective. Better to always admit the patient and keep under close observation. Once we have established that it is infective end-off, we need to go through entire principles. So the prompt and effective treatment we need to administer, reporting to concerned authorities, analysis of the cause, implementation of practices to prevent further outbreaks, and continuous audit of these complications, procedures, and practice patterns. So when we are tracking a cluster end-off, when we first get the first and the second patient, we need to suddenly get alarmed. We need to mobilize a team of people to like control this outbreak. So we need to call all the patients, we need to call the concerned doctors, the surgeons, and tell them that such a thing has happened. We need to call all the patients on phone and ask them about any symptoms of loss of vision, redness, blurring, and then make sure all proper documentation is there, take all the batch numbers, and if multiple patients are received from other hospitals, their ophthalmologists have to be informed. Then we need to constitute a team, consist of a microbiologist, ophthalmologist, operating room staff, hospital managers to take care of the outbreak. Now coming to the clinical management. So first we admit the patient, put topical our half-hourly antibiotics. Usually we prefer moxifloxacin and tobramycin, which covers positive and negative. But in cases of cluster end-off, usually we are suspecting gram-negative, so we would prefer to go with topical piperacillin and ceftazidime, both half-hourly. Usually we put 2 antibiotics. And then we decide on whether to put topical prednisolone drops, depending on the corneal involvement. Then we put on topical cycloplegic and monitor the blood sugar. We even give systemic antibiotic also. And now if you have a VR setup, it's fine. If you don't have a VR setup and if you're a tertiary center, I do recommend that all surgeons take an AC tap, vitreous tap, and intravitreal antibiotic before referring to the surgeon. Why so? Because I feel that the patient will not reach the treating doctor within 4 to 6 hours, which are very critical, and during this time the end-off can progress very fast. And frankly, not much surgical skill is required to give the intravitreal antibiotic. So if we have a VR setup, I mostly recommend a Corvette immediately with intravitreal antibiotic. And suppose the patient has come referred to us, we clinically assess, and within 24 hours, if there's improvement, we repeat the antibiotic. If not, we go for a Corvette. Each tertiary center should have an endophthalmitis kit where it has the relevant antibiotic and the dosing also marked. So this is how we do a AC tap. And then we take a 24 gauge needle, we insert half of the needle within the mid-cat vitreous and get a tap like this. And in a VR setup, we usually go for a biopsy, but in a tertiary center, this is fine. Sometimes if dry tap comes, not to worry, we can proceed with the intravitreal injection of Vanco and Cefta. And with the tap, we need to do either a blood agar or chocolate agar for bacteria, and a fungi if you're suspecting Subroid Rectocephala, and a glycolate drop for propionobacterium. Wow, which antibiotic to choose? Now we usually choose a gram-positive and negative to cover both. So we go for vancomycin for gram-positive and for gram-negative, which is usually what we see in these clusters and offs are usually ceftazidime, piperacillin, and sometimes if they are both resistant, we have gone even to imipenem, colistin, amikacin. And as I said, all patients should be put on systemic intravenous antibiotic as they can progress very rapidly. Now, coming to the rationale of past vena vitrectomy, I recommend that all patients of cluster should be undergo immediate core vitrectomy. Why? Because the EVS guidelines of having only hand movements vision and then deciding on to go for core vit is not applicable here because we are dealing with more with gram negative, and in the EBS actually patients only with sufficient media clarity were chosen. So corneal involvement cases were excluded, and most of the cases what we see in cluster end of have corneal involvement. And in 1995, when the study was done, ECC was a major form, and the vitrectomy, which was there in the early 90s, is very crude, and we cannot compare it with instrumentation today. And also, vitrectomy has improved far better from what was recommended at that time of only removing 50%. How much vitrectomy should we do? So we should not do a complete vitrectomy. So near complete is what we aim for as much as the view permits, and not to attack the periphery as my previous instructional course had highlighted, and not because of high risk of retinal tears. And limited PVD induction if possible, okay. If not, it's also fine. So depending on the experience of the surgeon and how the view of the on the table is. Limited PVD obvious the posterior port. So this is a short video. So we put 3 ports in, and then here's the vitreous with the exudates. We try and clear as much as possible, not attacking too much of the periphery. Then we clear the vitreous debris, preretinal exudates, and finally end with the intravitreal antibiotic. In between, we have to improve the view also. So in this case, we had a very thick FM on the IOL, which you have to remove. Sometimes you have to scrape the epithelium, remove the PC, and sometimes even we have to go for a corneal transplant also to do a thorough vitrectomy and put in a temporary keratoprosthesis and then proceed with a vitrectomy. How about IOL removal? IOL removal, theoretically, yes, it forms a biofilm. All these organs form the biofilm around process for all these prosthetics, and the infection will become more and more chronic and recurrent if we don't remove. But it is only recommended in low-grade infections where it's usually fungal or nocardia or very fulminant gram-negative organisms. Usually with thorough AC wash, fibrin removal, large posterior capsulotomy, we can prevent the IOL explantation. How about silicone oil? Silicone oil, yes, it does possess some anthracidal fungistatic activity. So esophagampanate is preferred if the organism is especially fungal or multi-drug resistant, and we can use it to prevent phthisis or in cases where RD has occurred during the surgery or pre-existing exudative RD. Let's skip ahead. So the cluster end of outcomes. So the most of the outcomes we have are usually poor. Only 50% of patients get around 20/400 or better. And most of the, around 64% in one study have been eviscerated. So these outcomes are poor. So main focus should be on prevention. So you should look for the source, whether it is intraocular instruments, irrigating fluids, surgical environment, contaminated phaco machines. Then we need to look at for all these check boxes of the central travel supply department, operating room issues, surgeon issues, and even the assistant issues. So in conclusion, we should stick to strict protocols, early diagnosis, evaluation of positive factors, timely referral, notification to health authorities, and discussion with the relatives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Karan. And without wasting any more time, I think I'll just welcome the next speaker, Dr. Revati Rajaraman, who needs no formal introduction. She's HOD Cornea at Arvind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore for several years now, is a meticulous surgeon, efficient consultant, knowledgeable teacher, and a kind-hearted soul as I know her. She is going to outline the role of Incident Investigation Committee after cluster endophthalmitis. To Revati, madam.
Thank you, Lippy. Can you hear? Can you see the slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Let me go ahead, and this role of fact-finding committee will start after the instance of cluster endophthalmitis. So whenever there are more than 2 or more infection on the same day or in the continuous OT days, it is called cluster endophthalmitis, and it can happen to anybody from a single setup or a shared surgical facility or to even a regional institute or teaching institute. It can happen. And once it happens, like the fact-finding committee can be an internal one, which can be formed by the hospital itself. Usually it will have the people from the members from the hospital infection control committee, if it is there already. So it can be an ad hoc team. And external team will be formed by the officials, by the DBCS team. So the internal, I am going to concentrate more on the internal team's work. So here, actually, what we have to do is to find out the probable source of the infection. First, we have to shut down the OT, of course, and then we have to look for the probable source. And so that we have to go through all the possible areas, and also we have to look for any patients which have been missed out. So we have to recall all the patients operated at the same day or the same time and find out whether they are doing okay. And also we have to look for any breach in the existing protocol. So we have to go through all the existing protocol, and for this, the work should have been there on place already, like a proper protocol should be there in the hospital. So where the problem can be to find out the source, it can be from anywhere, from all the consumables we use, starting from the patient's eye drops, which they are using before, and it can be anything, including the infrastructure or even the personnel, the OT gowns or even the AC vent, anything it can be. So we have to look into a large area for the possible cause. So to start with, first a document checkup. So first we'll try to narrow down it to a particular theater or a particular table or particular personnel. So for this, the OT log should be that it can be a manual log like this, or it can be an electronic log where all the cases enter into the OT in the sequence. It will be logged on, and that document should be checked, and so that we can narrow it down to which theater or which table that infections continuously, whether they occurred in a particular place. And then we have to look for all, and these kind of logs we use in our theater, like all the consumables used in that particular theater for that day will be that sterilization will be checked, and it will be documented, and the checking has been done by the doctor, the main surgeon, as well as the senior nurse. It will be signed out. So that also should be checked whether that day it has been done, any sterilization breach has occurred or not, we can find out. And then, of course, all the consumables, coming to the consumables, especially the pre-packed ones, we have to be very careful. And we can't just wash off our hands. It's pre-packed, so it's not my responsibility. So all the pre-packed consumables before released for use from each batch, some random samples should be taken out, and they should be checked microbiologically. So if any problem occurs, of course, they should not be released. And once even released, once they are used, at least for 48 to 72 hours, the remaining material should be kept ideally. In case of any early endophthalmitis, we have to recheck them for possible source. And any case, like even if it is not there, any suspicion occur about a particular batch, even unopened material has to be opened later, and again, they have to be checked. So always in case of cluster endophthalmitis, these are the most commonly, these are the culprits, the shared consumables. And coming to the sterilization and maintenance protocol, this again, there should be a pattern, there should be a protocol already there, a culture should be there in the OT system. that every autoclave and wherever they are being checked, that the work of the autoclave and ETO mission, all these things should be documented. And these protocols have to be again revised, and also whether they are properly documented. Any breach has been missed out, we have to check. The fact findings team has to go through all these things meticulously, and for this, including the AC maintenance, calibration of the equipments, fumigation, every protocol has to be revised again, and we have to gone through. And again, we have to now look for a possible source. So fresh material specimen should be taken from all the OT environment everywhere, including the RO water culture. We have to take out and we have to check again. It may not reflect this what had happened on that particular day or that particular period, but still we can go ahead and do so to find out any remaining culprits are there or not. And coming to medicines, these medicines start with even the topical medications we use preoperatively, or the iodine paint what we are using, or the drugs what we are using during the surgery. Everything have to be, including your antibiotic, intraocular antibiotic, everything has to be sampled and checked, and whether they are released only after the checking, that also have to be analyzed. And we should not forget to recall or contact all the potentially affected patients who were operated the same day or same time, and also they inform the concerned authorities about the incident. And also when they, like if you have done all these things, you will be prepared to discuss all your findings with them, and this will help you in a great way. And this is a case study which I am very fond of sharing, that how a particular one single surgeon unit only this happened, and it's not an infection which occurred in the same day or anything which occurred as a cluster, but a sporadic, like each day one patient, something like that, over a period of time. And it's a chronic infection, so low grade infection, which patients started coming in after a month or two. But he recognized the pattern and immediately sought out institute help, and also authorities he informed. And with a collaborated effort, they could find out, narrow it down. Not only they could find out the organism, they could narrow it down to a preoperative medication, and that's how legally also he was able to manage the problem. So this is the meticulous documentation, and these things are very, very important. So it's a nightmare situation for anybody. It will be immediately we'll feel defensive only. But of course, we have to agree some sort of a responsibility is there on our part also. And a methodical approach should to find out the possible cause. And also we should not neglect to inform the authorities and cooperate with them. And not only that, we have to remember all this, we'll be able to find out anything unless only if there is a system already there in place. All kind of protocol, documentation, everything has to be maintained. Not that in a small setup it cannot be done. In any kind of setup, these things have to be followed according to the volume of the work. And only these things can save us later from the legal point of view. That we have to keep in mind. Thank you.
So Dr. Revati Madam has dealt with some practical aspects of the investigation committee. Our next speaker is Dr. Sasikala Elizabeth, who has done her post-graduation from Arvind Eye Hospital and is now a medical consultant there. She is in charge of Central Sterilization Department for 6 years now. She has knowledge on Hospital Infection Committee and NABH related to OT sterilization. So to Dr. Sasikala.
Yeah.
Yeah. So meanwhile, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Your slides are ready, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. The outset. Are my slides clear?
Yeah. You need to switch on the PPT.
Okay. Can you see my slides moving in?
It's just the Dr. Sasikala OT requirement. You need to click on it, I think.
Stop share. Stop share and then share screen.
Double click it.
Yeah, just click on that. I think it will work.
Fine. Is it there? Are you? Is it visible?
No.
Are my slides moving?
No, it's not visible, Dr. Sasikala. It's not visible. Dr. Anant is, okay. Dr.
PowerPoint
Hanging, sir.
share PowerPoint PowerPoint screen
Dr. Anand Deshpande, sir, are you ready with your PPT? Deshpande, sir, you need to unmute yourself. Unmute.
Now is it okay?
Yeah, Sasikala, we can see your slide. Yeah, go on, please. Yeah.
Okay, Shashikala is continuing.
Yeah, Sasikala is continuing.
Let him.
Thank
let
you.
her.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'll keep up to the time. At the outset, I would like to thank the scientific committee for giving me this opportunity. My role will be, I'll be just sharing my slides on regulatory requirements for ophthalmic theaters. So as we all know, the main challenge with any ophthalmic surgeon, the main complication, that a dreadful complication anybody would expect, is postoperative endophthalmitis and toxic anterior segment syndrome. We saw it in a brief way by my previous speakers. Very well they have covered. So in an eye hospital, the high risk area is our operation theater. So many times operation theater is called the heart of the whole eye hospital. We are very lucky that the government of India has laid in a lot of regulatory methods, especially the National Building Code, which clearly mentions what are the protocols, what are the materials to be used for the building. So an efficient OT starts with how efficiently it's been constructed and how well it is being planned. Starting from the zoning and the materials that has to be used for the theater, for the patient care, everything has to be planned and procured properly. National Control for Blindness, NPCB, also lays in stringent protocols. And we are lucky that after undergoing the NABH, which has set in standard operating protocols and validation measures, we are able to maintain the standards. So the important requirements for OT includes OT design, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, the infection control protocols, and especially the periodic validation. So where should an ideal operating theater complex be situated? So it should be in a place where there is minimal patient movement, especially to avoid any dust, noise pollution. It should not be facing the road. So in the modern OTs, the zoning has to be properly placed in. This is basically to keep the bacterial contamination to the level and to keep the aseptic level in a proper measure. Zoning includes the protective zone, clean, aseptic, and the disposal zone. The protective zone or the unsterile zone includes the reception area where the paperwork goes on, the semi-sterile area, which is the changing room and the transfer zone, the sterile area, the scrubbing, gowning, gloving, operating room, and the autoclave room, the disposal zone, which includes the biomedical waste and all the equipment and supplies where it is procured. Always maintain a unidirectional flow. Here clearly it is shown in the picture how the patient flow is towards the operating room and how the staff is towards the operating room and how the sterilization windows is present and how the materials are being exited for waste disposal. So specific color codings and the specific denotions about the area and the sterile zone have to be displayed in the operating theater. So unidirectional flow has to be kept in mind when we design our theaters. The internal structures, the physical structures starting from the doors could be a double or a single hermeted stainless steel doors. The roof has to be stainless steel. Coving design is usually preferable because it prevents any contamination, any dust, and it's easy to clean also. The flooring should be having glazing tiles and larger tiles so that minimal amount of gaping or no gaping is present, minimal joints are there. Epox painting is always preferable for the OT because it gives an additional microbiological cover as well. And always avoid false roofing in the operating theater, especially in the operating theater complex, because it is difficult to clean. Air is an important culprit which has to be kept in mind. So a dedicated heating, ventilation, air conditioning system has to function for an efficient OT. Dedicated air handling units, ducts, AC compressors, which has to be running 24 hours with variable frequencies. 2 pre-HEPA filters, 5 micron and 3 microns are preferable. With the laminar airflow, there is a dynamic change in the OT. So the air quality and cooling, pressure and particulate count should be maintained within the ISO class 5 clean room standards. At least 20 to 30 air exchanges are required with minimal of 4 new air exchanges from outside. The measured air velocity and positive pressure has to be maintained inside the OT. HEPA filters definitely gives an important role in the modern OTs. It has revolutionized and there is no requirement for any fumigation process to happen. So the bacterial containing air within 30 centimeters should be kept at 10 per cubic meter in the operating site and 20 per cubic meter in rest of the OTs. So this video gives an animated image about the high efficient particulate air, how in an OT that HEPA system functions to reduce 0.3 microns to 99.97%. So most of the organisms of a size of 0.5 is being removed. Avoid using window ACs, and if you're using split ACs, make sure that the vents, the filters are being cleared properly, cleaned properly, and dried and then fixed in, because this could be a major source of infection in case of clusters. The temperature and humidity, according to the standards, it has to be maintained. Temperature of 21 plus or minus 3 and humidity of 55 is ideal. They should be recorded. You should have a recording for your individual OTs, what the temperature and humid. There are multiple components, as my previous speakers have mentioned, which could be source of infection. It could be a crowded OT, the materials that are used, the infrastructures, the tubings, anything can be a culprit. So always render free of all the living microorganisms, including spores. So cleaning, disinfection, terminal cleaning plays a major role. Unless it should not be compromised at any stage. Details about cleaning I will not be able to cover in my presentation now. Coming on to the autoclave, the horizontal autoclave machines which work on the steam under pressure principle are the more preferred ones. The manual ones are there, automated ones are there. Vertical ones which works on the gravity we do not usually use. Flash autoclaves, which are otherwise called as the immediate use steam sterilizers, may be used for purpose when there is a drop-in instrument. The horizontal double door autoclaves in modern OTs play a very major role because they are automatized. You have screens which display all the manual programs. It is easy for the person to handle because there's printers that are attached, and the manual programs, automatic programs are there, troubleshooting is there. You have screens which display the cycle, the programs, and certain program by the company people helps us to function very clearly about the various programs that we require. But we have to keep in mind, though it is automated, every parameter has to be documented when it comes to the court of law. In a mitigation process, you need to have documented that this process has gone through the standard phase with the temperature and what load. The three label indicator keeps us clear information, what load, how many instruments were there put in, what were the things that are used for the patient. So this has to be clearly maintained in autoclave record. Coming on to the indicators, which says us about the quality. There are 6 indicators. It's not hierarchy wise. The class 1 indicator, class 2, class 5 and 6 are the crucial ones. Class 1 indicator is a simple 3-line indicator. It just says that the product has gone through the autoclave. It doesn't say that the sterilization process, the parameters have been met. So any color change for the steam sterilizer from blue to black or for an ETO from blue to green means that the sterility it has gone through the sterilization process. Bovedic class 2 indicator gives us a clear idea that for an empty load, the pack is kept in the top of the load. So the pattern change according to the standard gives us that the autoclave machine, the vacuum function has been functioning well. It has to be documented weekly once. A Bovedic definitely has to be put in for an autoclave. The class 5 indicator SteriGauge has a very major role. It's very crucial. It has to be documented. Here the color change has to be complete from a empty white to the whole black. If continuously it fails, then the batch has to be changed in. Specifically, every load has to have a SteriGauge. TST, again, the temperature, steam, and time, that all the 3 critical parameters are covered in this class 6 emulating indicators. So the sterility assurance level has to be maintained within 10 to the power of -6. That means the probability that 1 in a million spore survives the process. But even though, if it is that situation, the bugs don't lie, and this can be picked up easily through the biological indicator. So this is an ideal method through which the load sterility can be proved. So the biological indicator, it has the Geobacillus stereothermophilus for steam, and for ETO, it is Bacillus atrophius. So the tubing contains the large number of bacterial resistant spores, heat resistant spores, which only under the right conditions. So after the tubes are placed in the autoclave, if the right condition has been met, once they are sent to the lab and incubated, it will remain the same color. If the organisms are not being killed and right condition hasn't been achieved, you will see as it appears in the 4th tubing that the color will change to brown. That means the autoclave has not run to the proper parameters. So we need to be careful about that. So in these cases, when the reports are being produced, it has to be documented if the biological indicator has passed. Ideally, every load has to have a biological indicator, but it is not possible because of the cost wise and for the results. At least once a week, definitely the autoclave, there should be a biological indicator that should be passed in. Now, recently we have the super fast rapid readouts, which within 24 hours, we're able to get in the 24 minutes, we're able to get in the results. This is because of the cost, we won't be able to use it for every case. Here again, air and water plays an important role. The surveillance is very important. For air, settle plate method and swab method can be used in. One has to be sure about the levels that has to be maintained both for the water and for the air. definitely there are in the tap water and the RO water and all kinds of water that is used for cleaning purpose and for the theatre purpose have to be undergone a water surveillance. So a dedicated RO plant has to undergo hot water flushing, and proper cleaning of the tank should take place. Proper monitoring is very much essential. One has to keep in mind that this can never be compromised. Coming on to the autoclaving of the things, so a good teamwork is very much essential. So you need to, after the theatre is completed, every case, the sets have to be segregated according to the sharp blend cannulated instruments. So then proper cleaning, meticulous cleaning is required for sharps. Better to use a soft brush. For cannulated tubes, better to use in 20 cc syringe and flush it off. Definitely they have to go through the ultrasonic cleaners, wherein any particulate matter tissues that are stuck in between the hinges will be removed by the ultrasonic waves, but through the cavitation. Then the instruments will be spread in air, or hot air dryers can be used in. Any presence of wet, moist will not let the steam to penetrate. The autoclaving process would not be complete. The sterilization will be incomplete. So good amount of spreading. Don't load the bins. Definitely each bin should have the 3-line indicator, and if possible, all the bins should have the Sterigage class 5 indicator as well. In between OTs also, if you want, we can use a high-speed autoclaves for in-between sterilization. Coming on to the materials that's used in the OT, it can also be a culprit. So definitely every time a batch changes in for the fluids, it has to go in for a culture. Those have to be recorded. As ma'am mentioned, every material that is used for the patient, every autoclave material that is used has to be coded. So it's easy for us to track back. Even on our EMR, we maintain such that the patient, when we open, all the materials are everything coded, and we are very much careful about. Coming on to the autoclave note, so it is the responsibility of the team leader, that's the doctor for that theatre, to be very much aware what the material has been used, what the expiry dates, and what was the batch, whether all the autoclave process have gone in. So this is like a double check. Apart from the CSSG team, the theatre team also and the operating team has to be aware of the things that are being used. So being very meticulous helps us to recall in any incidents of mishaps. Never underestimate the importance of hand washing and hand scrubbing. Always concentrate and focus time in teaching juniors and the medical assisting team, the surgical assisting team, to do a proper hand washing, hand scrubbing, and also gloving has to be maintained. Sterility has to be maintained in all levels. Of course, compliance audit has to be also undertaken to keep everything to the level. Last but not the least, biomedical waste management should never be compromised, because 15% of infected waste can become 100% if it is not concentrated at every level. So segregation at the source with the materials and with the proper posters being put in, and a proper teaching and continuous teaching is required for management. It should not be stored beyond 48 hours. So by following the safety requirements, definitely it is possible for us to achieve a 0% of postoperative endophthalmitis. Being an institution of a tertiary eye care, handling nearly 1 lakh cases a year, we were able to achieve in the previous years of 0.01% of endophthalmitis. So it is a reality, it is a dream that can come true, but it's only by a team effort and by a constant effort. I thank once again for giving me this opportunity. I could take questions towards the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sasikala. So some gripping slides were shown by Dr. Sasikala Madam. And next speaker is Dr. Anand sir, Dr. Anand Deshpande. He's a law expert. Besides being an ophthalmic expert, he's a law expert, a rare combo. He has been a legal advisor to varied ophthalmic societies. So Dr. Deshpande sir, can you start sharing your screen?
Yeah, I will be sharing.
I would like to make a small announcement to all the doctors. As per the instructions from the organization committee, all halls will be stopped for the inauguration by 5:25, as we have the inauguration at 5:30.
Yeah, right. So Anand sir, we can see your screen. You just have to enlarge it, I think.
Yeah, I'm enlarging.
Yeah, right. We can see it, sir. You're audible. Your screen is visible.
Dealing with all precautions and all that which has happened and taken, even then the endophthalmitis goes on, and there happens it, and then it comes the what will be the end of that endophthalmitis, and who will be blamed and who will be responsible. The cluster infection outbreak in ophthalmology surgery may happen in a solo practice or in a trust or a corporate hospital. The legal liabilities are different in solo practice and trust or corporate hospital. the under Consumer Protection Act, civil liability for negligence, the solo practice, it is the responsibility as he is the owner of the hospital. But in corporate, trust or government hospital, it is the responsibility of the trust hospital or such corporate hospital, because the Supreme Court has given the decision in this particular case that the patients, once they are admitted in such hospitals, it is the responsibility to satisfy that all possible care was taken and no negligence was involved in attending such the patient. In fact, it is the hospital who engages the treating doctor. Therefore, it is their responsibility. So, therefore, an individual doctor is liable and can be held jointly or severely liable. Even visiting doctors or the consulting doctors in private hospital cannot be held liable. So there is a very big loophole here that the visiting doctors, the doctors to the hospital and operating, they are not liable, but the hospital owner is liable because of this particular decision. The consumer does not avail the services of the such doctor individually by paying fee or consideration to those doctors directly, because the patient is paying the fees to the hospital. So the service provider is the hospital, consumer is the patient, and doctor is no way in between, because doctor is giving his services to the hospital. So the consumer of the doctor is the hospital, and the vice versa. So this is a triangle, and so the doctor can escape from this. In particularly, whenever cluster infection episode happens, the doctor is blamed. Is it correct? No, because the cluster infection cannot take place because of surgery, as the subsequent surgery can not meet the same complications even if one had in it the first surgery. So the complication is not the causing the cluster infection. This is the base mainly, but the cluster infection is because of infection source beyond the control of the surgeon, and for that surgeon cannot be blamed. In immediate action should not be taken against the surgeon. When the common source is cluster infection, hospital source, then material source, much of the discussion has been done on these points, so I need not go in detail for this. But then why surgeon is blamed when he is doing the work with his social work attitude and without his any fault in a corporate or a trust hospital? The AIOS state, is it blocking your view also? AIOS state and pardon, this is it blocking this also? AIOS state and local ophthalmic societies should take in such circumstances, because doctor is alone whenever there is a cluster infection takes place, and he is not able to face alone. In the surgeon as an individual is not sufficient to face the circumstances. So AIOS, state or local ophthalmic societies should stand behind him, as he is not as a fault, because cluster infection cannot happen because of the surgery of the doctor. It is because of the circumstances or the infrastructure which may not be in his hand. To ask task force committees of AIOS, state or local ophthalmic societies should rush to the place which will have legal members to see the legal matters and to take legal steps to protect them from unnecessary harassment, which happens without finding the real facts. It happens many times that surgeon is provided to be not responsible for it, and sterile material supplied by companies is at fault. For example, cluster infection episode in Indore Eye Hospital. Indore Eye Hospital is a charity hospital, and 2 years back there was a big cluster infection episode which was made, and the doctors were suspended, hospital was closed, and the registration was cancelled. So the AIOS team task force, in which I was also there, I also visited so many places wherever the cluster infection happens, and I found that the doctor is not at fault, the infrastructure is there, and such. And when I fight there, when gone through the all records and submitted to the High Court, I got the relief from the High Court. The registration was reinstalled, and the doctors were also reinstalled, and nothing was done against the doctor, because that was not the fault of the doctor. And this happens in many cases in cluster infection in charity or corporate hospital. Doctor and hospital were blamed. Medical media also contributed. Registration of the hospital was cancelled and hospital was sealed. You must have remembered that lot of media was speaking about the Indore cluster infection, and lot of papers were also there. In TV also there were newses. I represented the AIOS and virtual. So hospital in registration was reinstalled, that I have already said. But criminal liability of negligence and doctor, hospital are responsible. But in criminal liability, hospital doesn't come in the way, irrespective of which type of the hospital it is. So it is the responsibility of the doctor and doctor only if a criminal case is lodged against the doctor and the hospital or is not in the way. But Supreme Court has given a decision for every mishap or death during medical treatment. The medical man cannot be proceeded against for punishment. So Supreme Court also knows that doctor is not at fault for everything. Many things are beyond the hands of the doctor. Even the table death can take place even after so many and all precautions on the table, and doctor, even after taking all the cares, cannot save the patient. So this is understanding is there. So the Supreme Court has given this decision, and which is useful for us in everywhere. So I will say that doctor is definitely not at fault in cluster infection if it is not a solo hospital. In solo hospital, the condition is different, because he is the owner, he is the administrator, he is the master of the controller of the infrastructure. So the responsibility comes on him as infrastructure management and not as a surgeon. So the doctor should not be blamed whenever there are cluster infections, but all the way, all the time, in the media, on the TV, and in the papers, the doctors are blamed, and the public also thinks that doctors are butchers, which is never should be thought, and doctors should not be blamed in cluster infections as far as possible, unless it is proved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So law, court, police, these are some of the phrases. These are some of the phrases wherein medics, they get confused. So nice to have you with us. So you have to stop sharing your screen. Yeah, so I am able to share my screen. I have to go.
I have stopped, I think.
Yeah, you have stopped, sir, right. So screen, and yeah. So can Sabrina help me? Is my PPT visible?
Yes, doctor. No, doctor, your PPT is not visible. You'll have to share the screen, doctor.
Yeah, I have shared the screen.
Yes.
So I'll again go back.
My screen sharing is over, no?
Yes, doctor.
Okay.
Mr. Aman, please help.
Go to
share screen,
share
and
screen,
then
and then red mark
share
is there.
screen.
Share there only, and minimize it.
Where is Kanna?
Yes,
Minimize.
doctor.
Yeah.
Now
Now it is available.
Yeah, so now the PPT is visible, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is on an atypical, you can say, an atypical title I've chosen for this presentation of mine, The Medic and Mass Media Melodrama. Now, most of my slides, there might be no effective literature references for them. Rather, the slides are based on professional experiences. So CE is a situation, cluster endophthalmitis is a situation where suddenly the medic or the healer is victimized and gets labeled as the killer. Now, what is the difference between a true healer and a true killer? In case of CE, the victimized, that is a true healer, has to produce self-evidence, whereas in the case of a murder or in the case of a true killer, the victim has to produce evidence or their victim's relatives have to produce evidence against the murderer. So just see the irony. This lands the surgeon in a desperate situation, whereas the true murderer is all happy and confident. Keep calm and take a break. That's what most will tell you after an episode of cluster endophthalmitis. Well, you need to keep calm, but you need to take a firm charge of the situation. How can you take charge? Take charge by dealing with the mass, communicate to department and hospital authorities, show compassion and concern for the patients after informing them. Be polite and calm. Try not to lose temper. There will be all wild questions. Be wise. Consult wise men, experienced people who can help you in such circumstances. Be tactfully truthful and be confident. How the surgeon has to handle the media. First step here is communication. So communicate to the department and hospital authorities. Let the hospital spokesperson handle the media. If the hospital spokesperson is mature enough, wise enough, then he'll be able to lessen your burden. But somehow, if the hospital is not with the surgeon, suppose the surgeon has newly joined or there is some fault lying in the hospital or there is a blame game on, then the surgeon has to face the media himself or herself. So in that case, how the attitude of the surgeon should be, she or he should avoid controversial statements, maintain a balanced attitude. What the action should be, discussed with ophthalmic state and national societies. This should be done early on, especially if the surgeon is confident about what he has done surgically. There are no major faults there. And if the hospital is not so supportive of the surgeon. Press release can be done, depends upon the experience of the surgeon. Paid news, both positive and negative, are a reality. Legal action, that just depends whether the surgeon would like to take it, considering the financial implications and the resources and how much time it's going to take for the legal proceedings. If the hospital is supporting or if the surgeon is working in a hospital or institute, then hospital is supposed to handle the media. First, communication should be there with both media and the patients and the surgeon with understanding, empathy, and neutrality. Attitude should be one of taking responsibility. So the blame game, as I told, or the scapegoat pattern should not be followed. If a room leaks in the house, remember it is one of the rooms in your house. So you need to take responsibility. That is the decorum. What the action should be, offer information to the media from time to time to reduce the chance of speculation and inaccurate information being reported to the public. If the hospital or the surgeon are mum, then such news clippings will find place in the media, as Dr. Anand sir has also told. In the case of Indore Hospital, it happened. I have not taken the recent clippings, but some of the past clippings I have taken. So, aankh se kuch nahi dikh raha. This is the Hindi. Those who can read Hindi, they can go through this. I am from a Hindi speaking state, Chhattisgarhi speaking state. So even if the patient's vision is 618, 624, after an episode of endophthalmitis and pre-op, it has been counting finger 3 meter, but still they will give such a statement because they may need some financial reimbursement or they are confused. Motia bin can't, aankh fodwa can't, such phrases should be taken out of media language. I think ophthalmic societies can work for this. All such news items are put, such images are borrowed from some other sources and imbibed in the news clippings. This was an interesting article which found its place in Indian Journal of Ophthalmology 2018. The title is Recommendation for an Expert Team Investigating a Case of Cluster Endophthalmitis. So mind it, the expert team is not that expert, and humbly as ophthalmologists, as medics, we should admit this, that we also need recommendations from time to time. And the inference in this article was postoperative endophthalmitis is a multifactorial event. A single person in the OT or a single surgeon cannot be wholly blamed for the episode. A lot of melodrama is, of course, gonna ensue after you deal with even mass and medic, and you just need to accept this. Colleagues and fellow medics may be blinded because they do not want to take responsibility or they are inexperienced. Public may be enjoying the show. So what you need to do, you need to accept that all that melodrama is gonna happen, be neutral, know when to talk, where to talk, what to talk, with whom to talk, and better still, talk less. Crying is not allowed. I do not agree with this. Cry all the negativity out, realize the situation, think on the positives, think on the experiences which you're going to get, the revelations, who your true well-wishers are, and reevaluate yourself professionally and personally. I have been on this endophthalmitis topic for 2 to 3 years from now. I have been giving ICs and putting talks and posters and articles. So this is one of the letters. The title of this is, has a surgeon genuinely not followed the protocols for cataract surgery, need for contemplation before decision? This is going to be published maybe next month, so I'm not giving the DOI for now. So if the seniors, the government or the hospital authorities somehow decide that the surgeon has not followed the protocols for cataract surgery before giving this statement, they really need to rethink 3 times, 4 times on this statement. So there was an interesting table in this article. You will find it, and this was presented as a physical poster in the past conference. Thank AIOS for that. So especially if the hospital and the department is not having any protocol themselves, then they cannot blame the surgeon. It is not at all right for them, because there are so many protocols, national and international, Vision 2020, NPCB, AIOS, Arvind Eye Care System, state protocols, which tell about the pre-op visual acuity and certain indices like blood sugar, blood pressure before surgery, preoperative antibiotics, they should be given or not. So the protocols are quite varied. All cannot be communicated in this 9 to 10 minutes. So what I want the message to go from this forum to all of you, to all ophthalmologists, what we ophthalmologists need to do is see that hand, be that hand. So you need to be the hand, support to the person and organization to investigate and face cluster infection, especially managing the press, media, politicians, and the public image. Endophthalmitis is not an end for the eye, for the surgeon, or for the hospital. We need to take this as such. So that's the end of my presentation. I will stop sharing my screen, stop share. Okay, so we have some time, Sabrina.
No, doctor.
Before time, it's 2 minutes is still showing. So I think we can take a short panel discussion.
To close by 5:25. It's an order from the committee. I'm really sorry.
Okay, because Right, because it is still showing 2 minutes, and that's why I finished before time. So I thought that you will.
But thank you so much, doctor, for ending it on time. I really appreciate that.
Right. Yeah, my co-instructors need to be appreciated for that, and I thank each one of you individually. Thank you. Thank you, AIOS, and all my co-instructors. Thank you.
Thank you, chairpersons and speakers, for such an informative session. Thank you for all being a part of 79th AIOC virtual conference. We conclude this hall. Thank you.